Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you've ever wondered about the true nature of addiction, or if you've ever felt like the traditional disease model just doesn't sit right with you, then this video is for you. Today, we're diving deep into a game-changing perspective on addiction from the book, Addiction, A Disorder of Choice, by Gene M. Heyman. In this eye-opening breakdown, we're going to challenge everything you thought you knew about addiction being an uncontrollable disease. Instead, Heyman argues that addiction is more about the choices we make, even when those choices are influenced by our environment, stress, and emotional needs. We'll talk about why Heyman believes addiction isn't a disease, but a disorder of choice, how self-control plays a massive role in addiction recovery, and why the current treatment models might be doing more harm than good. Stick around, because this could totally shift your view on addiction and how we can tackle it. But before we get into all of that, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss an update on our latest content. Let's dive in. Fire. In Addiction, A Disorder of Choice, Gene M. Heyman presents a paradigm-shifting view on addiction, fundamentally challenging the long-standing perception of addiction as a disease. He argues that addiction is not an inevitable or uncontrollable condition driven solely by genetic or biological factors, but instead, it is a disorder that arises from the choices individuals make. According to Heyman, this view aligns more closely with our broader understanding of human behavior and autonomy, where people, despite external pressures or internal cravings, retain the ability to exercise choice in their actions. This assertion counters the medical model, which posits that addiction is a chronic, progressive disease with a biological basis that requires lifelong management or abstinence. Heyman suggests that such a view disempowers individuals, making them feel as though they are helpless victims of an inherent condition. In contrast, Heyman contends that addiction, while undeniably influenced by psychological, social, and environmental factors, remains ultimately a matter of choice, albeit not always an easy one to make. He suggests that addicted individuals may find themselves trapped in cycles of destructive behavior, but these cycles are sustained because of repeated choices that, over time, reinforce the addictive pattern. Heyman's thesis offers a more hopeful and empowering perspective, one that allows for greater individual responsibility and the potential for change. He proposes that addicts are not fundamentally different from anyone else in terms of their ability to choose, even if they are influenced by powerful external and internal factors. This reframing has profound implications for both the understanding of addiction and the approaches used in treatment and prevention. By recognizing addiction as a choice, Heyman opens the door to more flexible and adaptive strategies, emphasizing personal agency and the possibility of change through mindful decision-making rather than reliance on lifelong disease management. In Addiction, A Disorder of Choice, Gene M. Heyman places significant emphasis on the role of self-control and volition in the development and maintenance of addiction. Rather than viewing addiction as an overwhelming force beyond personal control, Heyman suggests that addiction is, in many cases, a reflection of poor decision-making driven by lapses in self-control. At its core, Heyman argues that addiction is not about an inherent inability to control one's behavior, but rather about how individuals exercise or fail to exercise control over their impulses and desires. Heyman's approach does not dismiss the complexity of addiction or the powerful role that cravings and physiological responses play in the experience of addiction. However, he contends that the decision to continue engaging in addictive behaviors, despite their negative consequences, is ultimately a matter of choice. This choice may be influenced by numerous psychological and situational factors, including stress, immediate gratification, or social pressures, but it is still a decision that the individual can make, even if that choice feels difficult or counterproductive in the moment. The idea that addiction is a disorder of self-control challenges the prevailing notion that addicted individuals are entirely powerless over their behaviors. It invites a reframing of addiction as a dynamic process in which an individual's choices can shift over time, provided they can regain or strengthen their capacity for self-regulation. Heyman argues that by focusing on the restoration of self-control, we can open the door to more effective treatment options that aim to empower individuals to make healthier, more mindful choices rather than focusing on abstinence as the sole solution. Heyman's perspective suggests that addiction is not an irreversible condition, but a condition of weakened volition that can be addressed through practices that enhance self-control. This could include therapeutic techniques aimed at building willpower, reinforcing personal goals, and creating an environment that supports healthier choices. Through these means, Heyman believes that individuals can gradually regain their ability to make better decisions, ultimately leading to recovery. In Addiction, a Disorder of Choice, Gene M., Heyman thoroughly examines how addiction is not solely an individual struggle, but also a phenomenon deeply shaped by the environment and social context in which a person exists. While he does not dismiss the role of personal choice, biological factors, or self-control, Heyman emphasizes that the social environment plays a crucial role in determining the likelihood of someone becoming addicted and in influencing the choices they make once addiction takes hold. His analysis challenges the more individualistic views of addiction that often ignore the broader, systemic influences at play, environmental stressors and coping mechanisms. One of the key arguments Heyman makes is that addiction often arises as a coping mechanism for dealing with various environmental stressors. Individuals who live in environments marked by chronic stress, whether due to financial instability, unsafe living conditions, or an overwhelming sense of social or familial pressure, are more likely to turn to addictive behaviors as a form of relief. For many, addiction serves as a temporary escape from the weight of daily struggles, whether that involves substance abuse, gambling, or other forms of compulsive behavior. In these cases, the addictive behavior is seen as a means of self-soothing, offering immediate gratification to counteract negative emotions or difficult circumstances. However, the problem lies in the fact that these behaviors often worsen the individual's situation over time, creating a vicious cycle in which the addiction exacerbates the very stressors it was initially used to escape. Heyman explores the role of mental health challenges like anxiety, depression, and trauma as factors that push individuals toward addiction, particularly when their environment lacks sufficient support systems. In environments where mental health care is inaccessible or stigmatized, people may lack the resources to manage these emotional burdens in healthy ways, leading to substance use or compulsive behaviors. The need for immediate relief, especially when long-term coping mechanisms feel out of reach, can drive a person to make choices that lead them down the path of addiction. Thus, environmental stressors become powerful contributors to addiction, as individuals struggling with their circumstances may find themselves turning to addictive substances or behaviors as a means of survival. The role of socialization and peer influence. In addition to environmental stress, social factors, especially the influence of peers, family, and broader cultural norms, play a pivotal role in addiction. Heyman draws attention to how individuals are often shaped by the social groups they belong to. For instance, people who grow up in families or social circles where substance use is normalized may be more likely to engage in those behaviors themselves. Peer pressure, family history, and community culture all contribute to the choices that individuals make when faced with the option of engaging in addictive behaviors. Social environments that encourage or tolerate substance abuse, whether overtly or subtly, can create a dangerous feedback loop in which addiction becomes a socially acceptable or even expected response to certain situations. Moreover, the influence of social support systems cannot be understated. Strong, positive relationships, whether they are with family, friends, or other community members, serve as buffers against addiction. People who have a solid network of supportive relationships are often better equipped to manage stress and emotional challenges without resorting to addictive behaviors. Conversely, individuals who experience social isolation, lack emotional support, or are disconnected from positive role models may be more vulnerable to addiction. The absence of a supportive social network increases the likelihood that people will seek solace in substances or behaviors that provide immediate but fleeting relief, leading to the onset of addiction. Socioeconomic factors and access to resources. Another critical aspect of Heyman's analysis is the role that socioeconomic factors play in addiction. Economic hardship, limited access to education, and a lack of healthcare resources create an environment where individuals may feel trapped in cycles of addiction. For example, those living in poverty may experience compounded stressors, such as unemployment, housing instability, or food insecurity, that push them toward addiction. These individuals may also face barriers to accessing treatment, as healthcare systems are often less accessible to lower-income populations. With fewer resources to address the root causes of addiction, these individuals may find it more difficult to break free from the destructive cycles of addiction. In these situations, addiction is not just an individual problem but a systemic one, linked to broader social inequalities. Heyman acknowledges that addiction does not exclusively target people from disadvantaged backgrounds. However, those who come from low-income or marginalized communities often face higher rates of addiction. Social inequalities play a significant role in creating environments where addiction thrives, whether it's through the pressures of survival, lack of access to social mobility, or the erosion of community support structures. In contrast, individuals from wealthier backgrounds may have more resources at their disposal to address addiction. They might have access to better healthcare, more robust social support systems, and greater financial freedom, which can facilitate recovery. However, even in affluent settings, Heyman notes that the pressure to perform or fit into societal norms can create addiction in different forms, such as overwork, perfectionism, or the pursuit of excess. Cultural norms and media influence. Cultural norms and societal expectations are also significant social forces that shape addictive behaviors. In many cultures, substances such as alcohol or tobacco are embedded in social rituals, whether it's drinking alcohol at social gatherings, smoking in social situations, or even recreational drug use being normalized among certain groups. Heyman's argument suggests that these ingrained cultural practices can diminish the perceived risks associated with addiction, making it more socially acceptable or even desirable to engage in these behaviors. Moreover, media representations of addiction often glamorize certain behaviors, presenting them as part of a carefree or rebellious lifestyle. This can normalize addiction to the point where it becomes a rite of passage or a symbol of personal freedom or independence. For young people, especially, exposure to such media depictions can send the message that addiction is not only harmless but also a part of a desirable identity. This is why Heyman stresses the importance of considering the social and cultural context in which addiction occurs, as individuals' choices are often heavily influenced by the behaviors and values they observe in their environment. The need for holistic approaches to treatment. Heyman's perspective on the environmental and social factors that contribute to addiction calls for a more nuanced approach to both prevention and treatment. Rather than focusing solely on individual responsibility and the removal of addictive substances, he advocates for a broader, more holistic approach that addresses the environmental and social conditions that allow addiction to flourish. In practice, this could involve creating safer, more supportive environments, whether by improving access to mental health services, reducing social inequality, or fostering community networks that encourage healthier coping mechanisms. Furthermore, Heyman argues that treating addiction effectively requires understanding the social context in which addiction occurs. This means recognizing the role of family dynamics, peer influences, and community structures in either supporting or preventing addiction. Treatment programs that address not only the individual's addiction but also the larger societal and environmental factors at play will be more likely to achieve lasting success. Conclusion. In sum, Heyman's emphasis on the impact of environmental and social factors highlights the complexity of addiction, urging us to think beyond biological explanations and consider the broader context in which addiction develops. Addiction cannot be understood in isolation. It is deeply entwined with the social, economic, and cultural environments in which individuals live. By recognizing these external influences, we can better understand why some individuals are more vulnerable to addiction than others and work towards solutions that address the root causes of addictive behavior at both the individual and societal levels. In Addiction, a Disorder of Choice, Gene M. Heyman explores the complex psychological and cognitive processes that underlie addiction, offering insights into how addiction is often shaped by distorted thought patterns and flawed decision-making rather than being purely a matter of biological compulsion. Rather than framing addiction as an uncontrollable, mind-altering disease, Heyman examines how the mind's processing of reward, desire, and self-regulation can lead individuals down the path of addiction. His view suggests that addiction is deeply entwined with cognitive distortions and maladaptive coping mechanisms that affect how an individual perceives their choices and decisions. The cognitive distortions of addiction. One of the central psychological components Heyman highlights is the role of cognitive distortions in addiction. Cognitive distortions are skewed or irrational thought patterns that individuals use to justify their behaviors or interpret situations in ways that align with their desires, even when those desires lead to negative consequences. In the case of addiction, people may rationalize their continued substance use or compulsive behaviors through cognitive distortions like minimizing the consequences. It's not that bad, blaming others, I use because my job is too stressful, or catastrophizing. If I stop, I can't handle life. These mental shortcuts make it easier for individuals to continue engaging in harmful behaviors, as they distort the reality of the situation and obscure the true consequences of addiction. Heyman explains that these distortions aren't a sign of weakness or a lack of intelligence, but rather a function of the brain's natural tendency to prioritize immediate gratification and reward. Addictive substances and behaviors typically trigger a powerful rush of dopamine, a neurotransmitter associated with pleasure and reward. Over time, the brain becomes conditioned to seek out these pleasurable experiences, making it harder for individuals to critically assess the long-term costs of their actions. As a result, the cognitive process becomes skewed, favoring short-term relief over long-term well-being, and leading individuals into repetitive cycles of destructive behavior. The role of reward and desire. The psychological and cognitive roots of addiction are also closely tied to the concepts of reward and desire. Heyman delves into how addiction is driven by the brain's reward system, which prioritizes immediate pleasure and gratification over delayed rewards or future consequences. The desire for a substance or behavior is not merely about seeking physical pleasure, it becomes a way of fulfilling emotional or psychological needs as well. Whether it's the need to escape discomfort, soothe anxiety, or experience a sense of control, the addicted individual may view the addictive behavior as the only viable way to satisfy those deeper psychological needs. Heyman's perspective on the reward system challenges the conventional medical model, which often frames addiction purely in terms of brain chemistry and loss of control. Instead, he underscores the importance of understanding how the brain's reward pathways interact with an individual's emotions, thoughts, and past experiences. Addiction, in this view, is not just about the chemical high but is also tied to the brain's deep-seated desire to repeatedly return to a rewarding experience, despite the negative outcomes. This reinforces the idea that addiction is not merely a biological or physiological problem, but also a deeply psychological one, rooted in the ways people process pleasure, reward, and emotional fulfillment. The influence of emotional regulation. Addiction is also intricately tied to emotional regulation, how individuals manage and respond to their emotions. People who struggle with addiction often have difficulty managing negative emotions, such as stress, sadness, or anger. For some, using substances or engaging in compulsive behaviors becomes a way to numb or escape these unpleasant feelings. Heyman notes that individuals who lack healthier coping mechanisms or who haven't learned how to process emotions constructively may be more prone to turning to addictive behaviors as a way of coping. When emotions become overwhelming, the brain's desire for relief can overpower rational thinking, making it easy to turn to addictive behaviors as a quick way out. For example, someone facing a difficult life event may reach for a drink or a drug to numb the pain, reinforcing the behavior over time and making it harder to develop healthier coping strategies. This cycle of emotional dysregulation, relief-seeking, and addiction is a core feature of many addictive behaviors. The longer this pattern continues, the more ingrained it becomes, and the more difficult it is for individuals to break free from their addictive cycles. The illusion of control, how addiction distorts perception. Another key psychological concept Heyman introduces is the illusion of control. Addicted individuals often believe that they have control over their behavior, even when their actions suggest otherwise. This perception can prevent them from seeking help or acknowledging the severity of their addiction. Heyman explains that many people view their addictive behaviors as temporary lapses or indulgences, telling themselves, "I can stop whenever I want." However, this sense of control is an illusion, as the addiction gradually takes hold and erodes the individual's ability to make sound decisions. This illusion of control is often reinforced by the brain's reward system, which makes the individual feel as though they are in charge when engaging in addictive behaviors. In this way, addiction becomes a self-reinforcing cycle. The more control a person feels they have over their addiction, the more entrenched the behavior becomes. Over time, however, the sense of control dissipates, and individuals find themselves unable to stop despite negative consequences. Heyman suggests that this cognitive distortion contributes to the difficulty many people face in recognizing their addiction, as they continue to believe they can stop at any time, even when evidence points to the contrary. Breaking the cognitive and psychological chains of addiction. Heyman's view suggests that treating addiction effectively requires addressing these cognitive and psychological patterns. Rather than focusing solely on eliminating the substance or behavior, treatment must focus on reshaping the thought processes that underlie addiction. This includes challenging cognitive distortions, strengthening emotional regulation skills, and helping individuals develop healthier coping mechanisms for managing life stressors and emotions. Therapeutic approaches such as cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, and mindfulness-based interventions can help individuals identify and correct their distorted thinking patterns, teaching them to recognize when their thoughts are leading them towards self-destructive behaviors. By addressing the psychological and cognitive aspects of addiction, Heyman believes that individuals can regain their ability to make healthier decisions, ultimately reducing the power that addiction holds over their lives. Conclusion. In summary, Heyman's exploration of the psychological and cognitive aspects of addiction underscores the importance of understanding addiction as a mental process influenced by distorted thoughts, emotional regulation issues, and a desire for immediate gratification. His approach offers a more nuanced view of addiction, emphasizing the interplay between cognition, emotion, and reward. By recognizing the psychological mechanisms at work, Heyman advocates for a treatment model that not only addresses the addiction itself but also works to change the thought patterns and emotional responses that fuel it. This shift in perspective opens up more pathways for recovery, giving individuals the tools to regain control over their lives and make choices that align with their long-term well-being. In Addiction, a Disorder of Choice, Gene M. Heyman calls for a significant reevaluation of the treatment methods used for addiction, challenging the predominant approach that centers on the medical model of addiction as a disease. Heyman's primary assertion is that current treatment strategies, which often focus on abstinence, disease management, and lifelong recovery, fail to address the root causes of addiction in a comprehensive way. Instead, he advocates for an approach that focuses on personal responsibility, the restoration of self-control, and the empowerment of individuals to make better choices moving forward. Critique of the disease model of addiction. The disease model of addiction, which sees addiction as a chronic, progressive illness with a biological basis, has been the dominant framework in understanding and treating addiction for decades. According to this model, addiction is a medical condition that requires lifelong treatment, often in the form of support groups, counseling, or medical interventions. While Heyman does not deny that addiction can be influenced by biological factors, he argues that the disease model is overly simplistic and ultimately counterproductive. By labeling addiction as an incurable disease, it implies that individuals are powerless to change and that recovery is not about reclaiming personal agency but simply about managing an irreversible condition. Heyman believes that framing addiction as a disease undermines personal responsibility and the ability of individuals to make choices that could lead to recovery. He contends that by presenting addiction as a permanent, uncontrollable condition, the disease model neglects the role of choice in the development and persistence of addiction. This approach, Heyman argues, can lead to a sense of fatalism, where individuals see themselves as helpless victims of their addiction rather than empowered individuals capable of making decisions to regain control over their lives, fostering self-control and decision-making skills in contrast to the disease model. Heyman emphasizes the importance of restoring self-control and improving decision-making skills as the foundation for overcoming addiction. Rather than focusing solely on abstinence from substances or behaviors, Heyman's treatment model prioritizes the development of personal agency. He suggests that individuals with addiction should be empowered to regain control over their choices, and that recovery is about rebuilding the ability to make decisions that align with long-term well-being. Central to this approach is the idea that addiction is not an inherent, unchangeable aspect of a person's identity, but rather a maladaptive coping mechanism shaped by the choices they make over time. Heyman advocates for treatment strategies that address the cognitive and emotional aspects of addiction, helping individuals to reframe their thought processes, identify distorted thinking patterns, and make more deliberate, thoughtful decisions. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, is one example of a therapeutic approach that Heyman supports, as it helps individuals identify and challenge the cognitive distortions that reinforce addictive behaviors. Through CBT, individuals learn how to make more balanced and rational decisions, replacing impulsive behaviors with healthier, more considered actions. Personal responsibility in recovery. One of the central tenets of Heyman's alternative treatment approach is the idea that individuals need to take personal responsibility for their addiction and recovery. Rather than seeing themselves as helpless victims of a disease, individuals are encouraged to recognize the role of their own choices in sustaining or overcoming addiction. This shift in perspective can be both empowering and motivating, as it frames addiction not as an inevitable fate but as a challenge that can be confronted and overcome through conscious decision-making. By taking ownership of their recovery, individuals can shift from a passive stance to one of active participation. Heyman believes that empowering individuals to take responsibility for their recovery fosters a sense of agency and autonomy, which are crucial in the process of breaking free from addiction. When individuals recognize that their choices have a direct impact on their lives, they become more motivated to make healthier decisions that align with their goals for well-being, leading to more sustainable and lasting recovery. Alternative treatment modalities. Heyman also advocates for expanding the range of treatment modalities available to those struggling with addiction, moving beyond the traditional focus on abstinence and medical intervention. While 12-step programs and other support group models can be helpful for some individuals, Heyman suggests that they are not universally effective and that different people may respond better to alternative approaches. In addition to cognitive behavioral therapy, Heyman highlights the potential of mindfulness-based therapies, motivational interviewing, and other therapeutic practices that can enhance self-awareness, increase emotional regulation, and reinforce healthier decision-making processes. Mindfulness-based approaches, for example, teach individuals to be more present in the moment and to develop greater awareness of their thoughts, feelings, and cravings. By cultivating mindfulness, individuals can learn to observe their impulses without automatically acting on them, giving them the space to make more thoughtful decisions. This shift in focus, from mere abstinence to improving self-control and emotional regulation, marks a key difference between Heyman's approach and traditional models of addiction treatment, reducing the stigma of addiction. Heyman also addresses the harmful effects of the stigma surrounding addiction. When addiction is framed solely as a disease, it can lead to feelings of shame and helplessness in those who struggle with it. By framing addiction as a disorder of choice, Heyman hopes to reduce the stigma and encourage a more compassionate, understanding approach to addiction treatment. This shift in perspective can help individuals feel less like failures and more like people who are capable of making better choices and reclaiming control over their lives. Reducing stigma also opens the door to more accessible treatment options. When addiction is seen as a disease, individuals may be reluctant to seek help due to the shame associated with the label. By viewing addiction as a behavior that is within the individual's control, Heyman advocates for a more supportive, non-judgmental approach that encourages individuals to seek help and engage in treatment without fear of judgment or social exclusion. A holistic approach to recovery. Finally, Heyman argues that addiction treatment should take a holistic approach, considering not just the individual's behavior but also their social environment, psychological well-being, and emotional needs. A more comprehensive treatment plan that addresses these interconnected factors will likely be more effective than one that focuses solely on abstinence or medical interventions. Heyman believes that by addressing the root causes of addiction, whether they are psychological, environmental, or social, treatment can help individuals build a foundation for long-term recovery that is grounded in healthier decision-making and self-control. Conclusion: Heyman's reevaluation of addiction treatment presents a more nuanced, empowering, and individualized approach to recovery. By shifting away from the disease model and focusing on the restoration of personal agency, self-control, and the development of healthier decision-making skills, Heyman offers a path to recovery that is rooted in choice rather than resignation. His approach not only challenges prevailing notions of addiction but also calls for a more compassionate, flexible, and effective framework for helping individuals regain control over their lives and break free from the cycle of addiction. The emphasis on personal responsibility, cognitive restructuring, and emotional regulation provides a powerful alternative to the traditional methods of addiction treatment, offering hope for lasting recovery through the empowerment of the individual.